Over the course of the years, I've met a number of Christians, very often from evangelical or Pentecostal persuasions, who are very good at memorizing passages from the Bible. And so in the process of conversation, as they're trying to explain their beliefs, as they're trying to convince me of the truth of what they're saying, they can very easily trot out and recite the passages that they're talking about, and very often provide also the biblical references that go alongside that. The problem that I have is that very often these passages are taken out of context. They snip out a single sentence or two sentences, a single verse from the Bible, and they present it as saying a particular thing, but then when you set it in the context in which it appears, you can see that there's something more subtle going on. And for me, the Gospel of Luke is the example par excellence of this. If you read Luke from cover to cover, you often get the sense that he's jumping around, that sometimes the statements don't match, or you wonder what the flow is or the reasoning behind it. And I just wanted to share with you one example of the way that it can change the way we understand what is being said. So I'm going to refer you to Luke chapter 16, and in verse 18, Jesus says this: "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced from her husband commits adultery." Now that seems pretty plain and simple, doesn't it? But let's now go to the context of Luke 16. So Luke chapter 16 begins with the parable of the unjust steward. This is a well-known story, and I'll leave you to read it for yourself. But what I will call you to is the very end of the parable, where Jesus makes this comment: "No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." And then we continue. "Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him. And he said to them, 'You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. The law and the prophets were until John. Since that time the kingdom of God has been preached, and everyone is pressing into it. And it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle of the law to fail. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced from her husband commits adultery." And then he passes on to the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. So just notice how that comment about adultery is just kind of dropped there in the middle of a passage that has nothing else to do with sexual relations whatsoever. In actual fact, if we look at it, the chapter is more about money than it is about anything else. And what immediately precedes it is the character of the Pharisees, who are said to be lovers of money. And the reason that they are deriding him, as it says, is the statement that he's just made prior to that, which is, no servant can have two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now what I'm going to do is link the idea of marriage to that statement and the Pharisees, who were lovers of money. Marriage is between one man and one woman. In other words, you can't have two wives. And Jesus' accusation against the Pharisees is they were trying to do exactly that. They were trying to be married to God in a religious sense, in an external religious sense. But more importantly than that, they were married to money, or they were married to power. They were married to some worldly principle far more than they were actually married to God. And you can see then how that understanding, that setting something in its context, can give you a much broader sense of what is going on with that statement than just taking the statement on its own. Now, I wonder if you've got knowledge yourself of any other examples of statements like this. As I say, for me, I'd go looking through the Gospel of Luke as one of the best examples of where this kind of thing happens, but it happens throughout the Word. Do you know of statements that you've heard taken out of context which actually mean something entirely different from what they appear to at first sight? Do drop something down in the comments if you know of something. I'll be fascinated to have a chat with you. As always, keep it friendly, and I look forward to talking to you next time.